Wild Kingdom, Sundays at 6:30 on Channel 8.
When I'd land, why, after I'd been doing my little show, the people would crowd around and rush up to the airplane and peer in. There always seemed to be one man that was the leader, and he'd turn around and he'd say, "My gosh, she was alone. There's no one in here," in the front seat.
Good evening. Happy Friday. I'm Dick Klinger.
Good evening. I'm Robin Chapman, and that was a woman that was very famous during the 20s and 30s for having a strong stomach.
A lady who flew alone. We'll have her story on our Friday evening show, as well as an interesting look at Old Town at a time when they're having a festival down there. Ours is a little more serious than festive, I think.
We'll have a look at a different kind of board game, which doesn't include Park Place and some boardwalk and some of the famous streets, but has some famous streets that you might.
Whatever happened to Dorothy Hester? That was Dorothy Hester that you saw at the beginning of our show tonight. Dorothy Hester is a Portlander, and in the 1930s, she was probably the best woman stunt pilot in the world. John Tuttle and Joe Marks tell part of her story. They start with a newsreel from 1930.
Well, I've been flying for about 18 months. And I fly because I love to. And I hope you enjoy my stunts.
Dorothy may be a little bashful in front of the microphone. She's certainly right at home now. We're taking off from the Grand Central Airport at Glendale, California, with the greatest little lady looper in the world. And here we go. Dorothy starts her daily dozen with a couple of rolls. She gets the coffee when she gets back. There are lots of other airplane rollers, but nobody does it quite like Dorothy. Instead of being right side up when she comes out of the roll, she likes to glide along on her back looking up at her feet. Here's a wonderful view of Dorothy if you stand on your head. Now she's going to take herself for a loop, and what a loop it is. Up, up, up she goes, and over. I wonder what she's going to do next. The sky whirls around, but it can't make a dizzy dame out of Dorothy. Aha, she's rolling her own again. Dorothy claims to hold the women's record for this and many other stunts, including 27 loops in succession. If she can do all this in a year and a half of flying, what'll she be doing 10 years from now? Pushing a baby carriage, maybe. So here's a good way to get your face lifted or get rid of a double chin. Now for the biggest thrill of all, an upside-down tailspin. Well, goodbye, Dorothy. Gosh, when you get married, your husband is certainly going to have a tough time keeping track of you.
It was awfully hard on an airplane. I'd come down and the struts were in an S, and the leading edge of the wing was all crumpled back. It was hard on an airplane.
Through the early 1930s, Dorothy Hester of Portland was probably the world's best woman stunt pilot. The first woman parachutist on the West Coast, she made jumps at $100 each to pay for her flying lessons. She toured the country as a stunt pilot. She was so good, the Great Lakes Company gave her a free airplane just for the advertising. During the worst of the Depression, Dorothy Hester was getting paid as much as $2,500 a performance. Dorothy Hester still holds 2 flying records, more outside loops than any other woman flyer.
Now the inside loop is like you pick up a bucket of water by the handle, by the ladle, and whirl it around, and the water will stay in there. You
Now,
see?
the outside loop is...
The outside loop is if you pick up the bucket of water from the bottom and around.
Dorothy Hester did 62 consecutive outside loops. She also did 56 inverted snap rolls. That's a world's record, too, more than any man or woman.
But
Dorothy Hester gave up her career when she married in 1934. She's 66 years old now. She lives in Banks, Oregon, and still flies some. But no passengers, only by herself.
right. And anyway, now they're closed airplanes. And the little ones I flew were always out in the open. And you couldn't fly as high as you do now. And each little city and town had its own personality and its own smell. You'd go over orchards and you'd smell the apple blossoms, and of course you even smelled the soot and smoke too once in a while. But
It sounds just wonderful.
it was. Now you fly. I think it's great to fly. But then you were your own boss. You flew where you wanted, when you wanted, and how you wanted. Now there's so many people flying that it has to be that way. And it is safe.
But it's not the same.
No.
For Evening, with Dorothy Hester, I'm John Tuttle.
Quite a lady.
She learned to fly from Tex Rankin, who's one of the pioneer aviators in the Northwest. He used to take a streetcar to his flight place down on Mock's Bottom. Spent $250 for her first airplane ride.
Apparently they did some tests on her, and she does have an unusual equilibrium, much better than the average person's, because however many snap rolls she did, that's a 360 snap, 360 snap, 360 in a plane. She'd think she did 70 of them one day in a row.
She had to raise the money for the $250 she had to raise for the flight school. She said, if I were a boy, I'd learn to fly. So he said, I'll teach you. And she jumped out of planes. First woman parachutist here at $100 apiece for the chamber, for the, let's see, who was it? The American Legion down in Medford paid her. She was a high school girl at that time.
She said in those days when you flew in a plane, you had to have your passengers looking around in the fields for places to land because you never knew when you might have to run out of fuel or your plane.
There are still people who do that now.
Looking around. Yeah, but it's not, the glide ratio on the jets is not quite as good. We'll be back. They're telling us to be quiet. We'll be back in just a minute.